What's the use of a cathedral in perfect condition if we still don't know how to turn on the lights? And that is exactly the reason why, more than likely, your personal energy levels often still just don't seem to take off. And why you feel that kind of unbearable mental fog at the end of the day. It's kind of like your brain is foggy, or as if you feel like you have a loading battery icon spinning while you try to process an idea. Your cells run the risk, on one hand, of dying drowned in a swamp of stagnant water, or on the other, of cracking and losing part of their important functionality. You already know it quite well. We've talked about it many times before, and I've personally given you several effective ways to avoid it entirely. In fact, as you can clearly see now, you may have thoroughly cleaned out the entire swamp and carefully sealed every single tiny crack in your cells. But it turns out that there is still much more to discover. In the previous video, what we did was prepare the hardware. We cleaned and sealed your cellular infrastructure. But today, we're going to move into a phase that is much more important, the phase of biological intelligence. Today, I'm going to give you the software that allows your cells to communicate with each other, and you'll understand why your brain suffers from static simply due to a lack of boron, and how your mitochondria can produce, and pay attention to this, up to half a liter of pure water a day, the highest fidelity water that exists. But I don't want, or I wouldn't like you to see this as a list of superfoods. Randomly, that I'm going to give you. No, because what you're about to discover is a true map of biological engineering, which is divided into 6 departments or 6 families. In the previous video, I focused on the infrastructure and the support, what sustains life. We looked at the families of hyperhydrators, and I talked to you about melon, cucumber, celery, and pineapple, which are responsible for cleaning out the swamp and widening the highways of your tissues. We talked about a second family, the structurals, and there I mentioned aloe, chia, and sea moss. These are the biological cement that seals the leaks in your membranes so that water doesn't escape. And then we talked about those that are electron shields, lemon and matcha green tea. They are the chemical bodyguards that maintain the negative charge of your cellular battery. And with that, we've managed to leave the cathedral watertight and protected. But now, in this video, we move from architecture to intelligence. Let's look at the 3 remaining families, the ones that not only form part of the system, but also govern it and manage energy production. Well then, we'll start with the 4th group, the metabolic sensors, that is, those that tune into your brain's signal. And that's where we're headed right now. Afterwards, we'll see. The fifth group, the mitochondrial optimizers, which are the ones that teach your cells how to produce their own water. And finally, we'll go to those that represent a return to the origin, that is, the fluids that connect your plasma with the original matrix of life. Now that you have the map restored within your conscious mind, I warmly welcome you to the full activation of your cellular operating system. Let's install the first layer of intelligence. Let's move on to the 4th family, the sensors, metabolic. These are responsible for adjusting the frequency. In biophysics, the brain doesn't think in words, but in electrical impulses that travel through an aqueous medium. We've been talking about this in all these previous videos. And if that water isn't structured, or if there are mineral interferences, the signal gets scattered. And this is what you experience when we talk about brain fog. So let's go to the first of the foods that are metabolic sensors, the pear. The pear is the great tuner of boron in our body. The water in your brain needs absolute precision so that your thoughts don't lag, so they don't have delays. And this is where this fruit comes in, which Eastern wisdom has revered for more than 2,000 years, the pear. China is the world's largest producer and consumer of pears, and they, through pure observation over thousands of years, call it the patriarch of fruits for cleansing. The body, and they consume the pear, as they say, to clear heat and moisten the lungs. With all due respect, of course, to Chinese medicine, which is an enormous source of inspiration and information, I interpret this as meaning that the pear helps reduce oxidative inflammation and restores structured water in the mucous membranes. But if we take a deliberate moment to pause and carefully examine its internal biological engineering, we will eventually discover that it is actually one of the richest natural biological sources of boron. Boron is a metalloid that conventional medicine usually ignores, but it is the conductor of the calcium orchestra. In the pear, it acts as a stabilizer because its function is not simply to increase calcium, but to manage where it stays and where it moves. Without boron, calcium becomes a completely anarchic element. And now pay attention, because this is a fact that should change the way you see this fruit. Extensive human nutrition studies have consistently shown that regular boron intake can significantly reduce the total amount of calcium lost through urine by a margin of almost 40%. In other words, boron helps your kidneys reabsorb calcium before it is lost, and this keeps the blood level constant without your body having to steal it from your own bones. It is literally a seal that prevents the foundations of your cathedral from simply crumbling. Or put another way, this is the first reason why boron stabilizes calcium, and as you can see, it's a purely logistical reason. For calcium to settle into the stone of your cathedral, that is, into the bones of our bodies, and not into the pipes or arteries, what we need is active vitamin D. But there is a technical problem. The vitamin D you get from the sun or from food is at first just a raw material. It's inert. In other words, it's like having bricks piled up at the entrance of a construction site, but no workers to put them in place. And this is where boron and the pear come in. It turns out they perform two critical engineering functions in your body. First, boron is the spark needed to convert vitamin D into its biologically active form. Calcitriol, that is, it's the chemical key that activates the hormone so that it can give the construction order. Without that key, the system is simply turned off. In other words, boron, what it does is activate the construction process. And second, boron, on the other hand, inhibits the enzymes that try to remove calcitriol from your blood. In engineering terms, what this does is extend its half-life of the hormone in your system, and by staying active for longer, the calcium cycle stabilizes and your body has the necessary margin to deposit it where it's really needed. In summary, without boron, you can get all the sun in the world, but the calcium won't get the signal to enter and will end up getting stuck, calcifying your soft tissues instead of strengthening your bone structure. If you are understanding this correctly, then this is precisely how we are able to eliminate, right at the very root, exactly what encourages and causes brain fog. You have to understand that calcium isn't just a building material for your bones, it's an extremely powerful electrical messenger. But, as with any high-fidelity system, if the message leaks where it shouldn't, what ends up happening is that it only creates noise. if calcium leaks uncontrollably into your neurons and accumulates in the intracellular space. When the cell should be at rest, it ends up causing stiffness and inflammation. It's more or less like a wire having constant micro-short circuits. Your brain starts firing signals that don't actually exist. That feeling of brain fog or mental fatigue is literally your brain trying to process static. And what is static, you might ask? Very simple. White noise, random information that doesn't contain a message, but nevertheless is consuming. Bandwidth. The same thing happens in your brain. And here I'll pause for a moment to go deeper into biological static, because it's something that will serve as a foundation for future content. It is produced through 3 sabotage pathways. First, through electrolytic interference, and this is the one we've been talking about so far. When boron is lacking, calcium has no regulator. It enters the neuron at the wrong time and causes small, meaningless electrical discharges. And your brain tries to read those discharges, but in reality, it's searching for a pattern that simply doesn't exist. And that's static. Second, through degradation of the medium. Structured water, H3O2, is like the fiber optic cable. We've talked about this several times already. Well, sugar melts that cable and turns it into something like old copper, and by that I mean plain liquid H2O. The signal no longer travels cleanly. It gets scattered, heats up, and generates interference. We'll talk about this in the next video of this series. And third, because of the signal-to-noise ratio, the SNR in telecommunications. If the noise is too high, the signal gets lost. Well, the brain uses a massive percentage of its energy. ATP not for thinking, but for filtering out noise to find the signal. That's why, and not for any other reason, you get exhausted. You make truly Herculean efforts just to keep the radio tuned in. Alright, let's take a closer look at this. This is exactly where the Pear becomes a highly specialized and precise biological tool for you, because the boron within it acts like a dedicated structural maintenance engineer for the cell membrane and actively assists in keeping calcium out of the neuron, while the neuron is at rest. In other words, it stabilizes the channels. And by stabilizing these channels, boron plays a critical role in ensuring that the neuron only fires when there is a genuine, significant, and absolutely necessary signal. In other words, it also effectively filters and cleans up the signal to maintain clarity. Without the essential boron found within the Pear, your brain functions much like an old, dusty radio that is constantly full of static and interference. However, once you provide it with that vital mineral, it transforms completely into a highly sophisticated and remarkably precision instrument. When you savor a fresh pear, you are tuning the dials of your inner radio so that the music of your thoughts sounds clear and free from any static. But beyond that, there is even more to consider. Now, let's talk about a highly essential and critical component of your internal engineering that frequently goes completely unnoticed and overlooked: the parathyroid gland. This tiny component is what regulates your calcium levels, and it does so through a hormone called PTH. In your body, there is an absolute hierarchy that dictates that the level of calcium in your blood can hardly vary at all. And why is that? Well, it's very simple, because calcium is the master switch for the electrical impulses in your heart and nerves. You probably have never heard this interesting fact before. So if the specific level of calcium in your bloodstream drops even slightly below normal, the small parathyroid glands immediately go into a panic mode and release a substance called PTH, which is more commonly known as the parathyroid hormone. And what PTH does is act like an urgent demolition order. And it tells your system, I don't care about the structure of the bones right now. Take the calcium from the pillars and throw it into the river so the heart doesn't stop. In other words, take it from the bones and put it into the blood so the heart doesn't stop. The parathyroid, as you can understand, becomes a tool for managing extremely important assets in your body. And the boron it contains acts as a sensitivity regulator for the parathyroid. Boron makes the gland wiser and less reactive. It prevents you from sending exaggerated alarm signals in response to what might simply be minor fluctuations. It brings balance. It modulates. And by modulating PTH, what boron does is stop the massive extraction of calcium and keeps the mineral locked in your solid structure in your bones instead of allowing it to be released chaotically into the bloodstream. You see, in your body's architecture, this is absolutely vital for two fundamental reasons. First, if PTH is always high, your bones become porous. You are losing the very foundation of your own cathedral, and you would lose your physical integrity. When calcium is massively extracted from the bones, the plasma, and this is the second reason, becomes saturated with minerals that shouldn't be there in such quantities. And what this does is create noise and interference in the electrical signal that travels through the structured water, the H3O2 in your tissues, and it ends up directly affecting your electrical connectivity. In other words, what it does is fight for clean conductivity. Well, now that you understand the importance of this fruit and the boron it contains, let's get into its protocol for consumption. But before that, I'm going to clarify something for you. It's no coincidence that in China, the pear is a pillar of their health. The Huangwan variety is a perfect example of balance between calcium, boron, and potassium. And it's not just that this variety contains boron. The important thing is the proportion it has, because it's a variety that has been studied for its perfect balance between potassium and boron. And this is particularly important because the element boron requires a highly efficient sodium-potassium pump in order to be fully able to enter the interior of the cell. With the level of ionic potassium that this pear variety has, boron basically has a turnkey delivery system. Well, China. These premium pears are grown in fertile soils filled with silty sediments that are incredibly rich in natural minerals which have been slowly deposited over many centuries by the blowing wind. And here I am specifically referring to the vast Loess Plateau located right in the heart of northern China, primarily within the Hebei province region. It is a remarkable place where, for many millions of years, the relentless wind has continuously carried fine mineral dust, all the way from the vast Gobi Desert. This wind has carefully deposited it, layer upon layer, gradually creating massive yellow earth plateaus that are now hundreds of meters thick and stretch across the horizon. It's a soil unlike anything you may have ever known. Our agricultural soils are often depleted, and they need chemical fertilizers to give the impression that they're alive. However, Hebei is a true, almost inexhaustible reservoir of silicates and boron. It's the only place in the world where geology has truly conspired to create the perfect substrate for growing the Huanhuan variety. That's why a Huanhuan pear, thank you. It's not just a fruit, it's a capsule of geological sediment processed by a living organism. It's soil technology turned into an element. And of course, naturally, it's consumed by the millions. Well then, with this information and to apply the knowledge I've shared with you effectively, what I propose are a series of basic rules for consuming the pear. The first rule is that the skin is non-negotiable. Boron and antioxidants, such as cinnamic acids, are concentrated in the skin. If you're not sure that the pear you're going to eat is organic, wash it well with water and vinegar, but eat it whole, because if you peel it, you'll lose 25% of its biological potency. Second, the ideal time to eat it is in the mid-afternoon, which is when the brain usually experiences a drop in energy and needs to retune its signal. Third, and pay attention because this is important, have the pear with a handful of walnuts. While the boron in the pear tunes the signal, the omega-3s in the walnuts seal the cell membrane so that the structured water doesn't escape through the cracks. The pear is not just food, it's a precision sensor for your hormonal and electrical system. And I imagine you'll never see the pear as just a simple fruit again. But pay attention because there are more surprises coming. Now let's talk about another great tool that also works as a metabolic sensor. The green kiwi, which is the true guardian of hydrolysis thanks to actinidin. You see, digesting proteins is one of the processes that uses the most water in the body. And if you don't get any help, your system ends up taking water from your tissues. In order to break down the bonds in meat or legumes, for example. While the pear carefully tunes the incoming signal, what the kiwi fruit does is provide this essential enzyme to efficiently break down complex proteins without ever having to take precious water from your body's tissues. It is essentially the ultimate water-saving device that allows you to successfully break down those proteins without stealing any hydration from your system, the water your brain needs to think. Just look at how important this is. Actinidin is a proteolytic enzyme that does the dirty work. And you might ask what actinidin is. It's a proteolytic enzyme, and the word comes from the Greek. Proteo, meaning protein, and lysis, meaning breaking down or dissolving. To put it simply, it is a biological catalyst that is specifically designed for the purpose of breaking the peptide bonds that maintain the structural integrity of protein molecules. If we imagine that a complex protein sourced from meat, eggs, or legumes is like a long, heavy steel chain, then actinidin acts as the wire cutter that breaks it down into loose links or individual amino acids, so they can finally enter the cell to be used. This process ensures that the large structures are dismantled into smaller, manageable components for better absorption. And this is where we connect with hydration, because the process of breaking down a protein is called hydrolysis. And as its name suggests, it requires water, H2O. If you lack a sufficient supply of digestive enzymes like actinidin, your physical system is forced to pull essential water from other tissues and transport that fluid directly into the stomach to try to manually facilitate that complex digestive breakdown process. However, when you eat kiwi, what you're actually doing is providing the worker, in other words, the enzyme, which will do the job using much less water from the system. Drinking water and then eating a heavy meal without enzymatic help is, in fact, a serious design flaw. You see, when proteins are poorly digested, they actually create a kind of swamp of waste in your body, and that waste is known as chaotropes, which then begin to break down and cause problems. The intricate molecular structure of seawater and the specific way that the enzyme actinidin functions is by allowing the process of digestion to be remarkably fast and exceptionally clean. By speeding up the breakdown of proteins, the body simply doesn't need to retain as much liquid water in the intestine and leaves that fluid free to be structured as H3O2. And what does it do? Well, it sends it to the muscles, or it sends it to the brain. Look, pay attention to this anecdote. Actinidin is so powerful that it's the reason why, if you put kiwi in gelatin, that gelatin never sets, because the kiwi simply breaks down the proteins in the gelatin. Well, in the body it does the same thing, and think, for example, about the dense proteins from a heavy dinner. Kiwi prevents your machinery from getting clogged. And now, here comes a synergy for the pear that I only briefly mentioned to you before. I'm going to reveal the secret of the capacitance of your brain membrane. In physics, capacitance depends on the quality of the insulator. That is, the better the insulator, the more electric charge your cell can hold without it leaking out. Well, walnuts are rich in alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA, a type of omega-3 that acts like the dielectric material, that is like an insulator in a capacitor. And if you eat pear with its boron and omega-3 walnuts, what you're doing is tuning the neuron and at the same time strengthening the insulation of the wire. Let's say you're repairing the antenna because omega-3 fats integrate into the membrane and give it the necessary fluidity so that the structured water, H3O2, sticks to the cell and doesn't leak out through cracks. In other words, you managed to seal the leaks. And at this point, with all the information I've given you and with this shield, with this protective shield and the sensors tuned, we're ready to move on to the next level of energy management. The fifth group, mitochondrial optimizers or light water. And here is a fascinating question for you to consider. What if I told you that your biological cells are actually capable of producing their own perfectly structured water without you ever having to drink even a single drop of liquid? This process is what we call metabolic water. It is the highest fidelity water that exists, and it is produced in your power plants, the mitochondria. Well, in order for this entire factory to function properly, we first need to bring in the specialized cleaning and construction experts, which in this case are the powerful pomegranate and the vibrant red grape. Just imagine for a moment that deep inside every one of your cells, there are thousands of tiny boilers, called mitochondria. The job of these mitochondria is to burn the fuel from what you eat to generate energy, ATP. And when you're young, these boilers are extremely efficient. But over time, with stress and excess sugar, it turns out that the parts start to fail. The mitochondria become old and defective, and instead of clean energy, they start to emit a kind of toxic smoke that we call free radicals. Now, this is exactly where the core problem lies. A cell full of damaged and malfunctioning boilers is a cell that simply doesn't have the necessary energy to effectively regulate and manage its internal water levels. And this is precisely where the combination of pomegranate and red grape come in, to act as a highly specialized and truly elite biological engineering team. How does cellular recycling work? Or, to use the technical term, mitophagy. Well, you see, pomegranate contains compounds called elagitannins, which when they pass by your microbiota are transformed into urolithin A. And this compound is famous in current science because it's one of the few capable of activating mitophagy. And what exactly is that? Well, think of your cell as having a quality control system. Urolithin A doesn't clean up the mess itself. What it basically does is tag the old boilers. It acts like a fluorescent marker that tells the cell, this mitochondrion is no longer useful, recycle it. And once it's tagged, what the cell does is activate its internal garbage trucks called lysosomes, and these wrap it up. The broken mitochondrion is broken down into basic parts and used to build a new young and powerful mitochondrion. It's a complete renewal process of your energy structure. And the result is that your own distilled water factory has just been renewed. This is where the fact becomes incredible. When you've repaired your boilers and have new mitochondria working at full capacity, a biophysical miracle happens at the end of the energy production chain. In the final step of cellular respiration, the mitochondria combine the oxygen you inhale with the protons from your food and create something called metabolic water. a person with healthy mitochondria can produce up to half a liter of water a day internally. And since this water is created in an environment of metabolic heat and hydrophilic surfaces, it isn't born like tap water as H2O. It is born directly as liquid crystal, that is H3O2, and it is truly of quantum quality. By activating mitophagy with pomegranate, you're not only gaining energy, you're also turning on your own internal spring. You are producing the purest and most structured water that exists, and you're doing it without having taken a single sip from a bottle. Well then, if pomegranate is the cleaning crew, red grapes, thank you, are the construction company. And we can't have one without the other if we want to have an efficient cathedral. When during the process of mitophagy, the cell identifies the boiler that no longer works, that is the defective mitochondrion, as I mentioned, it dismantles it and recycles its parts. If this step didn't happen, our cells would be completely filled with biological junk, and that junk would be blocking the flow of water. This is where red grapes come in with their star compound resveratrol. If pomegranate cleans the ground, resveratrol is the one that orders the construction of the new building. Resveratrol activates certain proteins called sirtuins, and these sirtuins are the master switches of longevity. When they are activated, what they do is send a clear signal to the cell nucleus telling it, we need more power. And this triggers mitochondrial biogenesis, which is basically the creation of brand new, shiny, ultra-efficient boilers from scratch. In other words, pomegranate removes the old, does the cleaning, and red grapes build the new, taking care of the expansion. This represents a comprehensive maintenance system for your essential electrical infrastructure. By consuming this duo, you're not just gaining energy, you're igniting your own internal spring. You're producing the purest, most structured water that exists, and you're doing it, as I mentioned, without taking a single sip from a bottle. But for this maintenance team to work like a Swiss watch, and for your mitochondria to truly renew themselves, it's not enough to just eat these fruits every now and then. This is very important. We need an engineering protocol that ensures the compounds reach where they need to go and in the way they need to get there. Here is the roadmap to integrate this dynamic duo into your body's daily routine. On one hand, there's the cleansing phase, which is carried out by pomegranate through urolithin A. The pomegranate, as I mentioned, is the cleaner, but remember that urolithin A is produced by your microbiota. What the pomegranate does is provide the L-argitannins, and as they pass through your microbiota, they are transformed into urolithin A. Therefore, if your gut is not healthy, the effect is diminished. So, ideally, you should consume the whole aril, that is, the red seeds. Not only will you get the L-argitannin, but also the fiber that feeds the bacteria that produce urolithin. And as for dosage, if possible, the ideal is to consume half a pomegranate a day or 150 milliliters of pure juice. Of course, the juice should be cold pressed and have no added sugar. And if you use juice, look for one where they've also pressed part of the peel, the white, bitter inner part of the pomegranate, because that's where it is, where the most potent precursors are concentrated. And now we come to the building phase. In this phase, red grapes and their resveratrol are excellent contributors, as you can imagine. But resveratrol is found in the skin and seeds of the grape, so if you peel them, what you're really doing is throwing the software away. The type of grapes, and pay attention to this because it's very important, they should be dark in color, black or deep red. And this is a very delicate point. They must be organic. This is important because resveratrol is a defense mechanism of the plant against fungi, But what happens if the grape or the plant has been treated with chemical fungicides? The plant doesn't need to produce it, and therefore its grapes will have much lower levels of resveratrol. Well then, is a small handful of 10 or 12 enough for you? Eat your grapes with the skin on. And if you find that you can tolerate the taste, try to chew on at least a couple of the seeds as well. The vibrant red grapes have a relatively moderate glycemic index rating, but to effectively prevent the sugar from breaking the water crystal and leading to the undesirable effect from occurring, the chaotropic effect of sugar, which we want to avoid, always combine them with a quality fat, such as that found in walnuts. And here are 3 final notes that I think are important. First, or the first point, there's no use in eating a kilo of grapes on a Sunday. Mitophagy is a slow process. You need a constant signal for at least 21 days for your mitochondrial park. Thank you. To truly start renewing itself. Second, if you want to boost the effects of pomegranate, make sure you have a diet that is rich in polyphenols such as nuts, green tea, and pure cocoa, among others, because these are the foods that feed Akkermansia bacteria, which are the best at producing urolithin A. Resveratrol is a powerful metabolic activator. If you take it at night, you might feel too energized, and this could make it harder for you to sleep. And with that, we've finished these 3 small rules. Remember, it's better to consume it before 3 p.m. And now we come to the other group of products from the same category, mitochondrial optimizers from group 5, but this is the last one from this 5th group. Dark berries, which are true photon antennas. What these fruits provide us is very interesting, and here, keep one fact in mind. The color of a blueberry, a blackberry, or a raspberry is not just nature's decoration, it's real. It's solar energy capture technology. Those dark pigments called anthocyanins are not just antioxidants. In the world of biophysics, they are light sensors and act as true parabolic antennas at the molecular level with a clear mission: to capture photons, especially those from the near-infrared spectrum, NIR, and then transfer that energy to the water in your cells. Here, remember what Dr. Gerald Pollack demonstrated, that the energy from light is the fuel that expands your structured water. Whenever you consume these vibrant berries, what you are actually doing is painting your internal tissues with specialized receptors that effectively turn, thank you, your skin and your eyes into true high-functioning biological solar panels, designed specifically to capture and utilize light. You're helping the sun, or even the heat from a campfire in winter, to charge your internal battery with an efficiency that water alone could never achieve. And regarding the usage protocol, here's an important first note. It's true that buying fresh fruit of this kind can be hard on your wallet, but here's a professional hack you need to know. Go to the freezer. Anthocyanins are extremely resistant to cold. Therefore, buying these fruits frozen not only saves you 60 or 70% of the price, but also ensures that the software is intact, because this type of fruit is usually frozen right at the peak of ripeness. And what's the right dose? A handful a day, about 50 to 80 grams. You don't need kilos. What you need is for the biological signal to be constant so that your mitochondria keep renewing themselves. If you eat your handful of berries and you go for a walk in the sun for a while, the first pillar of the triangle that we'll discuss in an upcoming video, the combination of your antennas, the pigments I'm talking about, with energy or light, will multiply the quality of your internal water by 10. And now, we have finally reached the very last group of delicious foods on our list. in order for your cathedral to be functioning with absolute electrical perfection, we require a specialized fluid that not only efficiently transports essential minerals throughout the structure, but also possesses the exact same unique vibrational frequency signature as your very own blood. Here we're talking about connecting your system to the original matrix of life. And if the other families were the software and the spare parts, this sixth family is the connection to the original electrical grid. I'm talking to you about those that represent a return to the origin, or total conductivity. And let's start with coconut water, also known as plant plasma. Coconut water is not just a refreshment, it's water that has been filtered and structured, molecule by molecule, through the fibers of the palm tree over the course of months. And just look at how powerful it is. Its composition is so similar to human plasma that in extreme emergencies during World War II, coconut water was used as a direct intravenous transfusion fluid. When you drink coconut water, you're not drinking a juice. What you're actually drinking is a blood substitute. And as you already know, and we've seen in previous videos, your health depends on expelling sodium and bringing in potassium. Well, coconut water provides potassium in its ionic form, which is more bioavailable. And this allows the pump in your cell membranes to work with something equivalent to what would be real racing fuel. To put it in very simple terms, drinking coconut water helps your cellular membranes to rapidly recover their natural voltage of either minus 70 millivolts or even minus 90 millivolts, which stress steals from you every day. And since it's water filtered by a living organism, it already comes in a liquid crystal state, H3O2. It's hydration that your cells recognize instantly. You don't spend a single joule of energy processing it. And this is the importance of coconut water. Save and remember this information well. But it's certainly not the only path that guides us all the way back to our very earliest origins. Now let's move on to another food that connects us to the original electrical network. We've already talked about it many times and it won't sound surprising to you at all. Surprising. Seawater, Quinton's marine totem. Thanks to this element, we recover the genius of René Quinton. He demonstrated something that should change. The way you see yourself, he showed that the internal environment of our cells, the interstitial fluid, is essentially diluted seawater. And he told us that we are a kind of aquarium with legs that is a walking aquarium. Seawater is not simply water with salt, it's an entire soup of biological information that contains all 92 elements of the periodic table, in the exact proportions your cells need. But pure seawater is hypertonic, meaning it contains too much salt for our bodies. And what we can do is lower it. And when we lower it, what we create is an isotonic solution in which the salinity becomes approximately 9 grams of salt per liter. By doing this, what we achieve, it's about creating a solution that is identical to your blood. And this mixture acts as a real reset for you indoor aquarium. If you flood your system with the totem of Quinton, what you manage to do is cleanse all the water, dirty your aquarium, and give your cells the perfect electrical environment. Where life was born millions of years ago. Well, to apply this in your urban cathedral, take note of these protocols. In the case of coconut water, which is your best voltage injection, if you do not have access to fresh coconuts, look for brands that guarantee you 100% coconut water. And preferably, it should have been processed using high pressure. It will be labeled as HPP. And not with extreme heat, because heat destroys the structure of the water, etc. You can utilize this formula as your essential emergency fuel after, for example, an exceptionally strenuous physical workout, a long sauna session, or even a full day of high intellectual demand, because it acts as a powerful and immediate surge of electrical energy for your brain. And for seawater, or what is your low-cost plasma by cold microfiltered seawater so that its electric charge has not been destroyed. And mix 1 part seawater with 3 parts low mineralization mineral water or revitalized water, with the Borks, which I explained how to make. When you do this, you will have made Quinton plasma. Thank you. Isotonic, and you will have made it in your own kitchen. You will have the most complete and powerful mineral serum on the planet for less than what a sports drink full of colorants and sugars costs. Drink a small glass of this mixture on an empty stomach or do it before meals, because what you're doing is replenishing the internal environment that Claude Bernard already spoke about, and you ensure that your conductivity is optimal, like that of a young and vibrant organism. To sum up, coconut water is the substitute for the plasma your cells drink to restore potassium. Seawater is the original mineral map so that your cathedral hip never loses its connection to the earth. And now with these two finished, we are finally done. Now we can take a general look at the complete map of your biological engineering. And with this information, you can become the programmer of your own hydration and stop being someone who simply drinks water. Let's very briefly and quickly review the groups of foods. First, there were the hyperhydrators, and there I told you about melon, cucumber, celery, and pineapple. They carefully clear out the thick swamp and widen the road to improve the path. Then I told you about the structural ones, aloe and chia. First, they act as the essential biological cement that effectively seals any tiny leaks your cathedral might have. Third, I previously told you about the powerful electron shield, refreshing lemon and matcha tea, which provide the negative charge that protects your internal battery. Fourth, we have the metabolic sensors, sweet pear and kiwi. These work together to tune out the background noise and keep your system balanced of your neurons. Fifth, we have the mitochondrial optimizers, fresh pomegranate, various berries, and sweet red grapes. They repair the boilers so you can produce your own water and capture light as if they were solar panels. And finally, we talked about those that bring us back to the origin, coconut water and seawater. These restore potassium and the original mineral map of the earth in our bodies. With this, you now have the complete map of the 6 families. Now you truly are the programmer of your own hydration. However, one piece is missing. This is a fundamental piece that has absolutely nothing at all to do with the things that you build, but rather with the things that you are trying to protect. Because it's no use having installed the most advanced software in the world in your cathedral if you then leave the door open for a saboteur to come in and melt it all down. There is a physical process, a force of molecular chaos that can turn your liquid crystal into dirty water in a matter of seconds. And if you don't learn to put up a shield, everything we've seen today, the pear, the pomegranate, the coconut water, all of that will seep through the cracks. But that shield, that war against chaos, deserves its own space. In our very next video, together, we will see how sugar functions as a true and powerful solvent of your energy, and how fats are actually acting as the electric assistant that will ultimately save your life. But for today, keep this 3-phase manual I'm about to give you, which you can simply start using tomorrow, if you happen to want or feel the need to properly stabilize your entire system. I know I have given you a significant amount of detailed information during our session today. We've talked about complex quantum physics, advanced fluid engineering, and deep biochemistry, but I really don't want you to get overwhelmed by all of the dense theory we are covering today. My goal is for you to leave here today with a clear and simple operations manual that allows you to regain sovereignty over your own life and use from it whatever you find appropriate. I'm going to organize all this knowledge into 3 logical phases. 3 steps that, as I said, you can start tomorrow, so that your voltage stops being just a theory and becomes your new biological reality. Phase 1, clearing out the debris, and you should do this in the mornings. Use hyperhydrators like celery, cucumber or pineapple. Their purpose here is to clean out the biological swamp and widen the roads with nitric oxide, eliminating all proteins that block or could block electricity. In other words, it lowers the system's resistance because this is the time to prepare the roads. Phase 2 is sealing, something to do, at midday. Install the structural elements along with the omega-3 fat shield. As I mentioned, remember that the structural elements are aloe, nopal, or chia. This way, you create that biological varnish that will end up repairing leaks in your membranes and ensure that water really gets trapped where it should, because without sealing, your energy leaks out. This is the containment phase. And finally, phase 3, the ignition phase, which is for the afternoons or at sunset. Then here is where mitochondrial optimizers and antennas come in with the help of lemon. On one hand, consume pomegranate and grape, considering them as the cleaning team I mentioned to you, that they will activate mitophagy. The goal basically is for your new boilers to be able to produce up to 1/2 liter of metabolic water per day. And on the other hand, also in the afternoons, I recommend you eat forest fruits because they are like those antennas that will help you capture infrared light so you can expand it. Exclusion zone, and thus keep your battery at maximum voltage. Well, we've reached the end of this video. You are no longer a passive observer. And if you integrate these 6 families into your life, you will have just installed the high-fidelity software your body has been waiting for years. You have become the chief engineer of your own biology. You no longer just eat fruit. Now you can program your hydration so that your inner cathedral shines brightly, and so that finally, it becomes completely and energetically sovereign in its own right. But remember what I told you. The software is useless if the infrastructure melts down. That's why in the next video, we'll focus exclusively on shielding. We're going to see how to protect your voltage from the sabotage caused by sugar and how to build an impenetrable cell membrane. And once we have that shield, we'll close this section with the ultimate key, which is the triangle of cellular hydration. And there we'll talk about pressure, the earth and light, the physical infrastructure that supports our entire universe. Well, if this video has helped you and you feel like it has given you back control over your energy, you would do me a huge favor by sharing it. You could potentially become that vital extension cord of knowledge that so many people truly need right now in order to finally stop living in the dark, lingering shadow of chronic dehydration. As I always tell you, go forward. Always forward. And I'll read your comments